The mist rolled in thick and slow, curling through the pines like ancient breath. At the edge of the national forest, Ranger Hannah Grace gripped her coat tighter around her frame. Her boots crunched against the frost-covered ground, the only sound besides the occasional rustle of branches. It was still early morning, but the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt watching. She had patrolled this region for years, knew every rock and trail marker, but today, something felt different. The air carried a tension she couldn't name, like the forest was holding its breath. Her radio crackled weakly on her shoulder. Static. No voices. The signal had been unreliable since last night's storm, but even so, this silence unnerved her. She paused at the trailhead, where a small wooden sign marked the boundary between forest and wilderness. Beyond it, the land fell into a deep hollow choked with mist. It was called Pine Hollow by the locals, but older names persisted in whispers, things like Widow's Pass or Lost Breath Hollow. Names born from stories best left buried. Hannah reached for her thermos and took a slow sip of coffee, her thoughts drifting. It had been 3 weeks since the disappearance of a teenage girl named Emma Lawrence. She hadn't been on duty when the call came in, but the story had haunted her from the moment she saw the photo. Bright eyes, auburn hair, a gap-toothed smile that hadn't belonged anywhere near the kind of fear described in the missing persons report. The official search had ended a week ago. No leads. No footprints. Just a backpack half-torn found near the ravine edge. But Hannah hadn't stopped searching. And then last night, something strange happened. Her motion-triggered wildlife camera, strapped to a tree far off any trail, had picked up movement that it wasn't a deer. Not a bear, that it was a horse. Wild. Big. Muscular. Black as obsidian. And it was standing still, staring directly into the camera. Almost as if it knew it was being watched. She had barely slept since reviewing that footage, and now something pulled her back here. Not logic. Not duty. Something deeper. A knowing in her bones. She moved down the slope, leaves whispering beneath her boots. The fog thickened, turning trees into specters. Just when she thought she might lose the trail, she heard it. A sound. Not a bird, not wind. A soft, deliberate huff. Like breath through flared nostrils. She froze, the mist parted just enough to reveal it, standing 20 feet away, tall and still. The same black horse from the footage. It stood between the trees like a myth come to life. Its mane tangled in wind, its eyes catching a strange, almost intelligent light. Hannah didn't move. The horse didn't flee. Instead, it looked at her. A long, steady gaze that unsettled her more than any mountain lion encounter ever had. There was no fear in those eyes, only urgency. It turned slowly and stepped deeper into the forest. Then it stopped. Looked back. A clear invitation. She hesitated. Common sense screamed to mark the location and return with backup. But something about the way it watched her, the stillness, the silence, the purpose, it overrode her instincts. "All right, let's see where you're going," she whispered and began to follow. The horse led her past trails she knew, deeper into terrain few rangers bothered with. Time lost meaning. The light filtered thinner through the pines and the mist never cleared. But the horse never disappeared. Each time it paused, it made sure she was still behind. Not once did it gallop off. It wanted her to come. Finally, the land dipped again sharply. The trees opened into a clearing choked with old stones and fallen branches. Hannah slowed her steps as the horse stopped ahead. Right at the edge of what looked like a sunken trench, she blinked. The earth had collapsed into itself here. A deep wound in the forest floor. Jagged edges, uneven ground, black soil. Undisturbed. Something was wrong about it, something cold and ancient. The horse stamped its hoof once. Then twice. Then it stared at her again, longer this time, and she knew, this wasn't just a sinkhole. This place held something. A secret buried by time and silence. She stepped closer. Her boots slid slightly in the loose soil. The trench wasn't wide, maybe 6 feet across, but deep enough that she couldn't see the bottom clearly through the fog. She crouched near the edge, running her hand along the ground. The soil was damp. Not from rain. From seepage, and something caught her eye, just at the edge of a root. A piece of fabric. Torn. Faded red, her breath hitched. She pulled it free. It was part of a jacket sleeve. Youth-sized. A brand that matched what Emma Lawrence had last been seen wearing. She looked up. The horse was gone. Panic surged, but only for a moment. Then she saw it again at the far end of the clearing. Watching. Waiting. Like its job was done. Hannah radioed in, static again. She took a photo of the sleeve, her hands trembling. Evidence. Proof. But even as she did, something rustled in the brush behind her. She turned fast, hand instinctively going to her sidearm. Nothing visible but that sound. Like something, or someone, had been watching her this whole time, her breath caught in her throat. Maybe she wasn't alone. Maybe the horse wasn't the only thing that had brought her here. She backed away from the trench, every sense alert now. Something wasn't right. She needed to get out, get back up, return with full support. She marked the GPS on her device, double-checked the coordinates and turned, but the horse was blocking the way. That it wasn't aggressive. Just standing. Silent. You want me to see more? Hannah whispered. The horse tilted its head, but Hannah knew she'd gone as far as she could alone. She slowly stepped around the animal, whispering thanks she couldn't explain, and started the long trek back. Behind her, the mist closed in, but the trench remained. And the truth, whatever it was, had just begun to rise. The walk back to the station should have taken her an hour. It took nearly 2. Not because she was lost, Hannah never got lost, but because her mind was racing too fast, her senses over alert, and every shadow now seemed to shift with meaning. By the time she reached the ranger's cabin, the fog had receded, but the weight of the trench's mystery clung to her like damp clothes. Inside, she uploaded the GPS coordinates and the photo of the torn sleeve. Her fingers shook as she typed the incident report. Unverified evidence, she labeled it. Possibly belonging to Emma Lawrence. She should have felt some relief. This was a lead. A breakthrough. But a coil of dread wound tighter inside her chest, and that horse, that impossible, knowing horse, she couldn't stop thinking about its eyes, how they had followed her, how it had guided her like a creature carrying a message no human language could hold. She barely slept that night. When she did drift off, it wasn't to rest. It was to dreams, strange and heavy. Earth-swallowing voices. Hooves galloping through mist. A scream muffled by soil. When she awoke, it was still dark. The forest outside was unnaturally quiet. No owls. No wind. Just silence, and then came the sound again. Not a knock. Not a footstep. A breath. Right outside her window. She rose slowly, every hair on her neck standing. Pulled back the curtain, and found herself staring into those same eyes. The horse that stood inches from the glass, its breath fogging the pane. Unmoving. Unblinking. And then, without a sound, it turned and walked into the trees. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her jacket, flashlight, and boots and followed. She wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever this was, it was calling her. And she needed to answer. The horse stayed visible this time, never too far ahead. Leading her not back to the trench, but deeper. Through terrain she hadn't walked in years. Past streams swollen with spring melt. Past thickets of pines so dense the world beyond them didn't exist. She followed until the light began to return to the sky. Just as dawn crept over the mountains, the horse stopped in a narrow glen, silent, dew-drenched, bordered by stone. Here it stood still. Waiting, Hannah stepped forward. The moment she did, her foot landed on something hollow. A low, sharp thud beneath the grass. She froze, crouched, pushed aside the moss and leaves, and there it was, a trapdoor. Wooden. Nearly swallowed by the forest. Its hinges rusted but intact. Her breath caught. She pulled it open. The scent of damp earth wafted up, thick with mold and time. A ladder descended into blackness. She turned to the horse. It was gone again. But she wasn't. She clicked on her flashlight, and descended. The ladder creaked under her weight. 10 feet. 15. Her boots hit packed dirt. She swept the light across the walls. It was a tunnel. Man-made. Reinforced with wood. Ancient. And then voices faint, not imagined. A girl's voice quivering. Help, please, anyone. Hannah's heart slammed in her chest. She broke into a run. The tunnel twisted left, then right. Then opened into a cavern, and there, half buried in dirt, arms tied, face pale and eyes wide with fear, was Emma Lawrence. Alive. Hannah dropped to her knees beside her. You're safe now, she whispered. I've got you. But the girl didn't smile. She shook her head weakly. No, she rasped. He's still here. A sound behind them. A shuffle, footsteps, too heavy to be hers, too real to be a dream. Hannah stood quickly, positioning herself between the girl and the dark. A shadow emerged at the end of the tunnel. Tall. Lumbering, the flashlight flickered. Emma began to cry. Don't let him take me again, she whispered. Please. And that's when Hannah understood. This wasn't just a rescue, this was a confrontation. Something had buried the girl. Something, or someone, was using the forest to hide its crimes. And the horse hadn't just led her here. It had warned her. The figure stepped into the tunnel's edge, and even in the dim light, Hannah recognized the man. Wesley Boone, former ranger. Dismissed a year ago for aggression and unauthorized surveillance in restricted zones. Rumors had swirled about his obsession with the forest's secrecy, about his belief that the land whispered truths only he could hear. Hannah hadn't believed the stories then. But now he stood before her, mud-streaked, wild-eyed, holding a rusted hunting knife with a trembling grip. "I knew someone would come," he muttered, voice uneven, almost conversational. "I left the signs. I let her cry at night. Forest always gives back what you bury. But not always to the right hands." Hannah didn't flinch. She slowly stepped in front of Emma, shielding her. "You need help, Wes. You don't have to make this worse." He laughed, a broken, hollow sound. "Help? I gave this land everything. I watched over it when they abandoned it. I listened when it warned me of the rot. But they called me mad. Called me dangerous." "You buried a living girl," Hannah said, voice steady, "and now you're going to answer for that." "I saved her," he barked. "She was wandering into places she wasn't meant to be. I gave her silence. Safety. She was peaceful until the horse, until it broke the pact." His gaze darkened. "She doesn't belong here. None of you do." Hannah's eyes flicked around the cavern. Roots tangled like veins overhead. The tunnel structure groaned with age. One wrong move and it would collapse. She didn't have time for slow negotiations. With deliberate slowness, she reached behind her and pressed the emergency beacon on her radio. The signal blinked once, just once. It would alert the station of her position. But Wes saw the movement that he lunged. Hannah braced, sidestepped, caught his wrist as he slashed. The knife grazed her jacket, ripping through fabric but not flesh. They grappled, boots scraping on damp earth, fists colliding with ribs and shoulders. Emma screamed behind them. Wes was strong, desperation lending him wild energy, but Hannah was trained. She ducked low, driving her elbow into his ribs and knocked the knife away. It clattered against the stones. She didn't hesitate. She cuffed his wrist with the spare restraint she carried and forced him to the ground. Breathing hard, blood thudding in her ears, she knelt beside him. "It's over," she said. "You're done burying things that don't belong in the ground." He didn't respond. Just stared at the ceiling, muttering in fragments, about whispers in the pine needles and creatures made of breath and light. Hannah turned back to Emma. The girl was shivering but conscious. She reached for Hannah's hand like it was the first solid thing she'd touched in days. "I thought I was going to die down here," she said softly. "You're not?" Hannah whispered. "Not today." Outside, the sun had risen full by the time Hannah led Emma back up the ladder, carrying her slowly with Wes shackled and stumbling behind. The air had warmed. A rescue chopper whirled above the treetops, drawn by Hannah's signal. But something made her pause at the glen's edge. There, between shafts of golden light, the horse stood again. Still and majestic. Watching. Hannah didn't speak, didn't need to. The horse nodded once and turned away, vanishing into the trees, but she understood. This wasn't just about one girl or one madman. Something lived in this forest. Something ancient that it had chosen to speak through a Mustang. And it had saved a life, maybe more than one. Emma was taken to the medical center. Wes was handed to authorities. But for Hannah, the story hadn't ended. She returned to the trench days later, this time with backup, cameras, tools. They unearthed remnants, small bones, cloth fibers, markings etched into stone. Not just Emma's evidence but older signs. Forgotten echoes of pain. As if the forest had been trying to reveal its scars for years. And only now had someone finally listened. She started writing reports. Quiet ones. Submitting them under different names. Investigations into forest myths. Into animal intelligence. Into the things that fall between science and spirit. She never mentioned the horse. Some things she believed were sacred, but in her dreams she still saw it, not running, not afraid, but watching and waiting for the next time it would be needed. The soft morning light filtered through the pine trees, scattering across the forest floor like nature itself was ready to unveil a painful truth. Hannah Grace moved slowly into the woods with the horse beside her. Her footsteps were gentle, but her heartbeat was heavy. The secret revealed last night wasn't just about a body or a killer, it was about an entire system, one that had silently concealed its wounds for years. The horse stopped beside a tree under which the earth had clearly been freshly dug. The place didn't just reek of disturbed soil, it was cloaked in a silence that screamed. Hannah bent down and touched the dirt as if the earth wanted to speak. Emma's face rose in her mind, innocent, frightened and stunned to be free. "It's here, isn't it?" Hannah whispered to the horse as if it could answer. The horse nodded, eyes reflecting the same loyalty, the same grief. This horse was no longer just a guide, it was a witness. A keeper of every injustice and every voice the ground had swallowed. Hannah took out the photograph she had found in Emma's pocket. A young girl holding a toy, standing between her parents. But it was the message on the back of the photo that changed everything. Beneath the dogwood pine's roots lies the truth they buried. Dogwood pine. This was it. On the tree's bark, barely visible and half swallowed by soil, was a faded, scratched name, perhaps carved long ago by a small hand crying out for help. Hannah immediately marked the location on her GPS and sent out a message for backup, but she knew there wasn't enough time. The man behind this would know the truth was closing in. She began to dig. The soil was stubborn, but her resolve was fiercer. The horse stood by, never stepping away. Within minutes, she uncovered a rusted locker-like box. Corroded. Still locked, she reached out, broke the latch and opened it. Inside was an old diary, stained with blood, and a recording device. What was written in the diary was chilling. It belonged to the man who, years ago, had abducted the girls who were later declared missing, their cases closed in silence. In clear, unrepentant words, it said, "If this truth ever comes to light, the forest itself will scream." Hannah's hands trembled. She played the recorder. A child's voice crackled through the speaker, "Please save us, someone's watching us." Just then a leaf rustled behind her. The horse whinnied, Hannah turned, and the shadowed figure stepped out into the light that he no longer wore a mask. That IT was a senior officer from the local forces, the same one who had earlier pressured Hannah to let the case drop. "You weren't supposed to find this, Hannah," he said darkly. "Some graves are better left closed." Her voice was unshaken. "How many children did you kill? How many secrets did you bury in these woods?" There was a savage gleam in his eyes. He stepped forward, but the horse blocked his path. Its hooves struck the ground hard, shaking the earth. In that instant, Hannah drew her pistol, aimed and fired, bringing the man to his knees. The sound echoed through the trees. Her radio crackled to life with confirmation. Backup was on the way. Hannah quickly cuffed the attacker and looked into his eyes. There was the same fear now that he had planted in the hearts of so many others. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived. The evidence, the locker, the diary and the recordings, Hannah handed everything over. Later reports confirmed it was a vast network involved in child trafficking, using the dense forest as a secret graveyard. Emma was reunited with her family. And Hannah, she found a voice. When it was all over and the courts had sentenced the guilty to life in prison, Hannah returned once more to that forest. The horse was still there. Free yet present. She walked up to it quietly, reached out her hand, and the horse lowered its head into her palm. "You opened my eyes," Hannah said softly. "You showed me what no one else could." Between the pines now there was light, not just from the sun but from truth. And for the first time Hannah felt it. The forest, once a symbol of death, had become a symbol of life. She turned to leave, but the horse didn't follow. It stayed, still and rooted, as if this was its home. Its sanctuary. A guardian of a sacred truth. And perhaps, when another silent cry for help rises again, the horse will return, because it knows the language of silence, and it bears witness to tears no one ever sees.